The microphone was still live when my son-in-law destroyed me. I was halfway through raising my champagne glass, the crystal catching light from the ballroom's chandelier, when Darren's voice sliced through the wedding reception like a blade through silk. "She won't be bringing much into this marriage," he chuckled to his groomsmen, not realizing every guest could hear him. "Her mother's sweet, but poor. At least she tried." Poor. That single word landed heavier than a judge's gavel. The ballroom, filled with 200 guests, gardenias, and the scent of old money, went dead silent. Forks paused mid-bite. Conversations died. Even the string quartet seemed to miss a note. My daughter Alina's face drained of color. Her veil, pinned with pearls I'd kept hidden in my desk drawer for 15 years, suddenly looked too heavy for her delicate shoulders. She stared at me with eyes full of shame she didn't deserve to carry. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I simply set down my glass with the kind of calm that comes before a storm and folded my napkin like I was preparing for prayer. Hi viewers, kindly tell us where you're watching from and what time it is. Warm welcome to the family, enjoy the story. Because in that moment, sitting in my second-hand dress at table 12, I knew something Darren Lucet could never imagine. Something his old money family, with their private schools and silver spoons, would never see coming. I had been hiding a $43 million inheritance for nearly 15 years. Every day, I drove my reliable but plain Honda to my part-time teaching job. I clipped coupons. I wore sweaters until the elbows thinned. I lived in a 2-bedroom cottage with furniture from estate sales and a garden I tended myself. Not because I had to. Because I chose to. It was the only way to stay safe after what they'd tried to do to me when my husband Maurice died. The lawyers, the judges, even Maurice's own brother. They'd all circled like vultures, trying to erase me with paperwork and legal tricks. They'd nearly succeeded, too. But I'd learned something in those dark months after the funeral: silence can be armor. And sometimes, when sharpened with the right evidence at the right moment, silence can cut deeper than any insult. Darren thought he'd married into poverty. He was looking at a woman who controlled patents worth more than his family's entire legacy. Water rights that could buy and sell his father's precious country club 3 times over. Stock certificates locked in a vault downtown that most people would never see in 10 lifetimes. I watched him laugh with his groomsmen, watched him accept congratulations from guests who probably thought they were doing charity work by attending my poor daughter's wedding. None of them knew that the woman they were dismissing had beaten the system once before. Had outsmarted lawyers who tried to steal everything from a grieving widow unfamiliar with financial matters. The music resumed. Guests began talking again, their nervous laughter filling the spaces where shock had been. Some pretended they hadn't heard. Others whispered behind their programs. I excused myself from the table, my heels clicking across marble floors toward the side door. I needed air. I needed to think. Because after 15 years of careful hiding, after 15 years of protecting my daughter from the kind of predators who smell money like sharks smell blood, everything had just changed. Darren had just made the biggest mistake of his privileged life. He thought calling me poor would put me in my place. Instead, he'd just woken something that had been sleeping in shadows, protected by silence and sealed documents, waiting for exactly this moment. Would you have stayed silent in that moment, or would you have revealed the truth right there? Comment below. I'd love to know what you would have done. The cold night air bit my skin as I stepped onto the venue's side terrace. Stars scattered across the darkness like diamonds on black velvet, sharp and distant. I could still hear the wedding music drifting through the glass doors behind me, but out here, finally, I could breathe. My hands were steady as I pulled out my phone. No missed calls. No emergencies. Just me and 15 years of carefully buried secrets threatening to explode. I looked down at my dress, navy blue, bought on clearance 3 months ago. The kind of dress that blends into crowds, that makes people's eyes slide past you without seeing. I'd worn it on purpose tonight, just like I wore everything on purpose. The modest cottage 20 minutes from here. The Honda with 160,000 miles. The job teaching part-time at the community center, helping adults get their GEDs. All of it designed to make me invisible. Because visible women get destroyed. I learned that the hard way when Maurice died 7 years ago. My husband had been brilliant in the quiet way that builds empires. Not through flashy deals or skyscrapers, but through patents nobody understood and water rights people forgot about until droughts hit. When his heart gave out at 58, I thought grief would be my biggest enemy. I was wrong. The real enemy came in $1,000 suits with briefcases full of papers I was too emotional to understand. Maurice's brother showed up at the funeral with a lawyer. Not to comfort me, but to explain why half the inheritance wasn't really mine. Some technicality about business partnerships. Some clause I'd supposedly agreed to but never remembered signing. They had judges who owed favors. Banks that suddenly couldn't find documents. A system designed to erase grieving widows who didn't know how to fight back. But here's what they didn't count on. I'd been married to Maurice for 12 years. I'd watched him work, learned his methods, understood his careful way of protecting what mattered. The night before they planned to file papers that would strip me of everything, a courthouse clerk named Jennifer slipped me an envelope. Inside was a copy of a corrected deed with a timestamp from 2 days before Maurice's funeral. Someone had been planning to rob me before my husband was even in the ground. That piece of paper saved me, but it also taught me the most important lesson of my life. Power without protection is just a target painted on your back. So I fought back. Quietly. Carefully. For 2 years, I lived in legal limbo while lawyers battled over every dollar, every document, every signature. I sold jewelry to pay my attorney. I worked 3 jobs to keep my house. And when I finally won, when the inheritance was legally, completely, undeniably mine, I made a choice that probably saved my life. I disappeared into ordinary. Don't forget to hit that like button if you're hooked so far. But tonight, standing on this terrace with Darren's insults still echoing in my ears, I realized something had shifted. For 7 years, I'd used silence as a shield. Maybe it was time to use it as a sword. That battle taught me silence could protect me. But tonight, silence would deliver justice. The thing about almost losing everything is that it changes how you see power. Most people think power is loud, fast cars, big houses, names on buildings. But real power lives in the shadows, in documents most people never read, in patience most people can't manage. Maurice understood this. He never flashed his wealth or bragged about his success. Instead, he quietly bought patents for water purification systems that seemed useless until California hit a drought. He invested in boring companies that suddenly became essential when technology shifted. While other rich men bought yachts, Maurice bought the mineral rights under their vacation homes. The loudest dog in the fight, he used to say, is usually the most scared. I thought about that now as I remembered how his brother Robert had strutted into our lawyer's office 2 weeks after the funeral. Gold watch, Italian shoes, confidence that money gives men when they think they deserve what others have built. Selena needs to understand the reality, Robert had told my attorney, speaking about me like I wasn't sitting right there. Maurice made promises to family that supersede any romantic arrangements. Romantic arrangements. That's what he called our marriage. I'd sat there in my black dress, hands folded, while Robert's lawyer spread out papers across the conference table. Partnership agreements I'd never seen. Business deals that supposedly predated our wedding. A trust fund that claimed half of everything Maurice owned had always belonged to his brother. "I'm sure you understand," Robert had said to me directly, his smile sharp as broken glass. "This is just business. Nothing personal." But it was personal. Every signature they claimed was mine, every document they said proved their case. It was all designed to erase me from my husband's life like I'd never existed. The first month, I believed them. How could I argue with lawyers and judges who spoke in legal language I barely understood? What did I know about business partnerships or mineral rights or patent law? Everything, it turned out. Because I'd been there for all of it. I'd watched Maurice work late into the night, had brought him coffee while he reviewed contracts, had listened to his phone calls with investors and lawyers and government officials. More importantly, I knew my husband. And Maurice never made a deal without keeping receipts. The breakthrough came when I was going through his desk, looking for our marriage certificate to prove some point about community property. In the back of the bottom drawer, behind files about household insurance and car repairs, I found a manila folder marked Family Insurance. Inside were copies of every document Robert's lawyers claimed as evidence. Every single one. But these copies had something the originals didn't: Morris's handwritten notes in the margins. Insurance against Rob's greed, read one note next to a partnership agreement. Fake, drafted to look real if needed, said another next to a trust document. My husband had known his brother would try to steal from me. So he'd created fake documents to let Robert think he had a case, while keeping the real agreements locked away where only I could find them. Maurice had been protecting me even after death. The war that followed lasted 2 years. Robert had money and connections, but I had something better: the truth, documented in Morris's careful handwriting, backed up by timestamps and digital files he'd hidden in 3 different safety deposit boxes. When the judge finally ruled in my favor, awarding me the full inheritance plus damages for frivolous litigation, Robert's face turned the color of old concrete. "This isn't over," he'd whispered as he walked past my table. But it was over. I'd won completely, decisively, permanently. And that's when the real danger started. Subscribe if you believe justice, no matter how quiet, always finds its way. Because winning once didn't mean I was safe. It only meant I had something worth stealing again. The microphone was still live when my son-in-law destroyed me. I was halfway through raising my champagne glass, the crystal catching light from the ballroom's chandelier, when Darren's voice sliced through the wedding reception like a blade through silk. "She won't be bringing much into this marriage," he chuckled to his groomsmen, not realizing every guest could hear him. "Her mother's sweet, but poor. At least she tried." Poor. That single word landed heavier than a judge's gavel. The ballroom, filled with 200 guests, gardenias, and the scent of old money, went dead silent. Forks paused mid-bite. Conversations died. Even the string quartet seemed to miss a note. My daughter Alina's face drained of color. Her veil, pinned with pearls I'd kept hidden in my desk drawer for 15 years, suddenly looked too heavy for her delicate shoulders. She stared at me with eyes full of shame she didn't deserve to carry. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I simply set down my glass with the kind of calm that comes before a storm and folded my napkin like I was preparing for prayer. Hi viewers, kindly tell us where you're watching from and what time it is. Warm welcome to the family, enjoy the story. Because in that moment, sitting in my second-hand dress at table 12, I knew something Darren Lucet could never imagine. Something his old money family, with their private schools and silver spoons, would never see coming. I had been hiding a $43 million inheritance for nearly 15 years. Every day, I drove my reliable but plain Honda to my part-time teaching job. I clipped coupons. I wore sweaters until the elbows thinned. I lived in a 2-bedroom cottage with furniture from estate sales and a garden I tended myself. Not because I had to. Because I chose to. It was the only way to stay safe after what they'd tried to do to me when my husband Maurice died. The lawyers, the judges, even Morris's own brother. They'd all circled like vultures, trying to erase me with paperwork and legal tricks. They'd nearly succeeded, too. But I'd learned something in those dark months after the funeral: silence can be armor. And sometimes, when sharpened with the right evidence at the right moment, silence can cut deeper than any insult. Darren thought he'd married into poverty. He was looking at a woman who controlled patents worth more than his family's entire legacy. Water rights that could buy and sell his father's precious country club 3 times over. Stock certificates locked in a vault downtown that most people would never see in 10 lifetimes. I watched him laugh with his groomsmen, watched him accept congratulations from guests who probably thought they were doing charity work by attending my poor daughter's wedding. None of them knew that the woman they were dismissing had beaten the system once before, had outsmarted lawyers who tried to steal everything from a grieving widow unfamiliar with financial matters. The music resumed. Guests began talking again, their nervous laughter filling the spaces where shock had been. Some pretended they hadn't heard. Others whispered behind their programs. I excused myself from the table, my heels clicking across marble floors toward the side door. I needed air. I needed to think. Because after 15 years of careful hiding, after 15 years of protecting my daughter from the kind of predators who smell money like sharks smell blood, everything had just changed. Darren had just made the biggest mistake of his privileged life. He thought calling me poor would put me in my place. Instead, he'd just woken something that had been sleeping in shadows, protected by silence and sealed documents, waiting for exactly this moment. Would you have stayed silent in that moment, or would you have revealed the truth right there? Comment below. I'd love to know what you would have done. The First National Bank downtown looked the same as it had 7 years ago. Marble floors, brass fixtures, and the kind of quiet that comes from old money and older secrets. I'd been here twice a year since the inheritance settlement, always on a Tuesday morning, always wearing the same unremarkable clothes that made me blend into the background of other customers conducting their business. The safety deposit box area was in the basement, behind a vault door that weighed more than my car. Claudette Rinn, the gray-eyed woman who'd been my banker since Maurice died, met me at the entrance with her usual professional smile. "Mrs. Armand," she said, scanning her key card to unlock the first security door. "Your usual Tuesday isn't for another month. Everything all right?" "Just need to make some copies," I told her, which was technically true. Claudette had been with the bank for 23 years and had the kind of discretion that comes with handling other people's secrets for a living. She'd never asked why I kept so much money in accounts I never touched, never questioned why a part-time teacher needed 3 safety deposit boxes, never commented on the fact that my investment portfolio kept growing while I drove a 7-year-old Honda. She led me through the second security door into a room lined with boxes of every size. Mine were numbers 347, 348, and 349, medium-sized boxes that Maurice had rented under different names to spread the risk. "Take your time," Claudette said, handing me the keys. "I'll be at the desk when you're finished." Box 347 contained the originals of every legal document that proved my ownership of the inheritance. Marriage certificates, death certificates, court rulings, trust agreements. All the papers that turned Maurice's money into my money, legally and permanently. Box 348 held the evidence that had saved me during the legal war with Robert. Maurice's handwritten notes, the fake documents Robert had used, the timeline that proved attempted fraud. Insurance, Maurice had called it, and he'd been right. Box 349 was newer, filled with documents I'd added over the past 7 years. Annual trust statements, patent renewal certificates, property deeds, stock certificates. Proof that the 43 million had grown into something much larger. I pulled out the latest investment summary and almost laughed. $51.2 million. In 7 years of hiding from my own wealth, I'd accidentally made 8 million more. Maurice would have been proud. I made copies of everything: the trusts, the accounts, the court documents, the patent certificates. Enough proof to bury Darren's assumptions so deep they'd need archaeological equipment to dig them back up. But as I fed papers through the copy machine, I realized something that made my hands shake slightly. This wasn't about money. It never had been. Darren's insult had cut so deep because it erased everything I'd survived. The legal battles, the years of hiding, the sacrifice of living below my means to protect my daughter from exactly the kind of predator who'd just married into our family. He'd reduced all of that struggle, all of that strength, all of that careful survival to one dismissive word: poor. When I finished copying, I organized everything into a slim leather folder that looked expensive enough to command respect but not so flashy as to scream wealth. Claudette raised an eyebrow when I requested certified copies of the trust statements. "Preparing for some kind of disclosure?" she asked carefully. "Preparing for memory," I replied. Because that's what Darren had stolen from me at the wedding. Not money. I'd never needed his family's approval to access my accounts. He'd stolen the memory of who I really was. A woman who'd beaten the system. A woman who'd outsmarted lawyers and judges and predators. A woman who'd turned silence into armor and patience into power. I thought about Alina, probably still on her honeymoon in Santorini, posting pictures of blue domes and sunset dinners with the man who'd publicly humiliated her mother. She didn't know about the inheritance. I'd protected her from that knowledge her whole life, the same way Maurice had protected me with fake documents and hidden evidence. But protection had its limits. And watching Darren smirk at me across that ballroom, I'd realized something important. Sometimes the people you're protecting need to see you fight back. Smash that like button if you believe knowledge is the real power. As I walked out of the bank with my folder of certified truths, I felt something I hadn't experienced in 7 years. Not fear of being discovered, not anxiety about protecting what I'd built. Power. Real power. The kind that comes from having the evidence to end someone's arrogance in a single conversation. But first, I needed something else. Something even more dangerous than money or documents or legal proof. I needed an ally. Jonelle Vera answered her phone on the second ring, her voice as sharp and precise as I remembered from 7 years ago. "Selena? This is unexpected. Are you all right?" I was sitting in my car outside the bank, the folder of certified documents on the passenger seat like evidence waiting for trial. Through my windshield, I watched ordinary people living ordinary lives. Walking their dogs, checking their phones, buying coffee without having to think about whether spending $4 would reveal too much about their financial situation. "I need your help," I said. "It's time." Jonelle had been my forensic accountant during the legal war with Robert, the quiet woman in rimless glasses who could read financial statements like other people read novels. She was the one who'd helped me trace Morris's hidden assets, who'd built the paper trail that proved Robert's documents were fake. More importantly, she was the one who'd told me to disappear after we won. Rich widows become targets, she'd warned me the day the judge ruled in my favor. If you want to keep this money, you need to become invisible. 7 years later, she was still the only person who knew the full truth about my inheritance. The only person who understood how much strength it had taken to live like I was poor while sitting on a fortune that kept growing. "What happened?" she asked, and I could hear her already reaching for a pen. I told her everything. Darren's public humiliation at the wedding. Alina's face when her new husband dismissed her mother as charity work. The way the entire ballroom had gone silent, then pretended nothing had happened. "He called you poor," Jonelle repeated, and I could hear the anger building in her voice. "At your daughter's wedding. In front of 200 people. Silence on her end, the kind that comes before storms. "Where are you now?" she asked. "Sitting outside First National with copies of everything." "Good. Meet me at my office in an hour. It's time to build your ledger of truth." Jonelle's office hadn't changed much. Still the same glass desk covered with calculators and legal pads, still the same wall of certifications that proved she could dismantle anyone's financial lies with surgical precision. But when I walked in carrying my folder, something was different in her eyes. Not the careful professional distance she'd maintained during the legal battle with Robert, but something sharper. Personal. "You know what this reminds me of?" she said, gesturing for me to sit. "Those transcripts from your brother-in-law's case. Remember what his lawyer called you?" I did remember. It was burned into my memory like a scar, a grieving widow unfamiliar with financial matters. "They tried to erase you then," Jonelle continued, opening my folder and spreading the documents across her desk. "This Darren is doing the same thing. Different weapon, same goal." She picked up the latest trust statement, $51 million reduced to neat columns of numbers on bank letterhead. "The difference is, this time you're not grieving. This time you're angry. And anger with evidence is the most dangerous combination in the world." We spent the next 3 hours going through everything. Not just the financial documents, but the timeline. When Robert had tried to steal from me. How Maurice had protected me even after death. The years I'd spent hiding, building a life that looked ordinary while managing investments that most hedge funds would envy. "You've been hiding to survive, Selena," Jonelle said as she organized the papers into a presentation that would make any lawyer weep with envy. "Now you need to reveal to live. Would you have trusted someone with a secret this big? Comment your thoughts." By the time we finished, the sun was setting through her office windows. I had a complete financial profile that proved not just my wealth, but my competence. Bank statements showing 7 years of smart investment decisions. Patent royalty records proving ongoing income. Real estate holdings that had doubled in value. But more than that, I had something else. Something I'd forgotten during all those years of careful hiding. I had a witness. Someone who'd watched me fight the first battle and win. Someone who knew that calling me poor wasn't just an insult. It was a fundamental misunderstanding of who they were dealing with. "What's your timeline?" Jonelle asked as I gathered the documents back into my folder. "Alina gets back from her honeymoon next week. There's a family brunch planned at Darren's parents' house. Perfect. Public setting, casual atmosphere. He won't see it coming." As I walked toward the door, Jonelle called out one more thing. "Selena, you've spent 7 years protecting your daughter from predators. Maybe it's time to let her see what happens when predators mess with her mother." For the first time since the wedding, I smiled. Really smiled. For the first time in years, I wasn't afraid. I was ready. The microphone was still live when my son-in-law destroyed me. I was halfway through raising my champagne glass, the crystal catching light from the ballroom's chandelier, when Darren's voice sliced through the wedding reception like a blade through silk. "She won't be bringing much into this marriage," he chuckled to his groomsmen, not realizing every guest could hear him. "Her mother's sweet, but poor. At least she tried." Poor. That single word landed heavier than a judge's gavel. The ballroom, filled with 200 guests, gardenias, and the scent of old money, went dead silent. Forks paused mid-bite. Conversations died. Even the string quartet seemed to miss a note. My daughter Alina's face drained of color. Her veil, pinned with pearls I'd kept hidden in my desk drawer for 15 years, suddenly looked too heavy for her delicate shoulders. She stared at me with eyes full of shame she didn't deserve to carry. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I simply set down my glass with the kind of calm that comes before a storm and folded my napkin like I was preparing for prayer. Hi viewers, kindly tell us where you're watching from and what time it is. Warm welcome to the family, enjoy the story. Because in that moment, sitting in my second-hand dress at table 12, I knew something Darren Lucet could never imagine. Something his old money family, with their private schools and silver spoons, would never see coming. I had been hiding a $43 million inheritance for nearly 15 years. Every day, I drove my reliable but plain Honda to my part-time teaching job. I clipped coupons. I wore sweaters until the elbows thinned. I lived in a 2-bedroom cottage with furniture from estate sales and a garden I tended myself. Not because I had to. Because I chose to. It was the only way to stay safe after what they'd tried to do to me when my husband Maurice died. The lawyers, the judges, even Maurice's own brother. They'd all circled like vultures, trying to erase me with paperwork and legal tricks. They'd nearly succeeded, too. But I'd learned something in those dark months after the funeral. Silence can be armor. And sometimes, when sharpened with the right evidence at the right moment, silence can cut deeper than any insult. Darren thought he'd married into poverty. He was looking at a woman who controlled patents worth more than his family's entire legacy. Water rights that could buy and sell his father's precious country club 3 times over. Stock certificates locked in a vault downtown that most people would never see in 10 lifetimes. I watched him laugh with his groomsmen, watched him accept congratulations from guests who probably thought they were doing charity work by attending my poor daughter's wedding. None of them knew that the woman they were dismissing had beaten the system once before. Had outsmarted lawyers who tried to steal everything from a grieving widow unfamiliar with financial matters. The music resumed. Guests began talking again, their nervous laughter filling the spaces where shock had been. Some pretended they hadn't heard. Others whispered behind their programs. I excused myself from the table, my heels clicking across marble floors toward the side door. I needed air. I needed to think. Because after 15 years of careful hiding, after 15 years of protecting my daughter from the kind of predators who smell money like sharks smell blood, everything had just changed. Darren had just made the biggest mistake of his privileged life. He thought calling me poor would put me in my place. Instead, he'd just woken something that had been sleeping in shadows, protected by silence and sealed documents, waiting for exactly this moment. Would you have stayed silent in that moment, or would you have revealed the truth right there? Comment below. I'd love to know what you would have done. The thing about revenge is that it works best when your target hands you the perfect moment. Darren gave me that moment before I even had to ask for it. The Lucid house was exactly what I'd expected. Marble entryway, crystal chandelier, the kind of tasteful wealth that whispers instead of shouts. 23 people scattered across an open-concept living space that probably cost more than most people's entire houses. Alina hugged me when I walked in, her smile genuine but tired around the edges. 2 weeks of marriage to a man who publicly humiliated her mother had apparently taken some shine off the honeymoon glow. "Mom, you look nice," she said, and I caught something in her voice. Relief, maybe. Like she'd been worried I wouldn't show up at all. "Wouldn't miss it," I replied, holding my folders casually at my side. Darren's mother, Patricia, descended on us with the kind of aggressive hospitality rich people use as a weapon. Air kisses, compliments about my charming outfit, questions about my little teaching job that were designed to sound interested while actually establishing hierarchy. I played along, smiling and nodding while she guided me toward the main group. Financial advisors, country club friends, a federal judge who apparently went to college with Darren's father. The kind of people who decided things in quiet rooms and never questioned their right to make those decisions. "Everyone, this is Selena," Patricia announced, like I was a museum piece being displayed. "Our sweet Alina's mother." Sweet. There was that word again. I shook hands, made small talk, accepted a mimosa I didn't want while people assessed me with the quick, dismissive glances reserved for relatives who didn't quite fit. A few seemed genuinely kind, older women who probably remembered being young wives themselves, men who asked polite questions about my work. But I was watching Darren. Waiting. He was holding court near the fireplace, still glowing with honeymoon confidence, telling some story about their trip to Greece that involved him heroically navigating foreign customs officials. "The thing about Europeans," he was saying, "is they respect authority when they see it. I just had to show them who they were dealing with." Nods and chuckles from his audience. That's when I made my move, walking casually toward the group while Darren finished his story. He noticed me approaching and his expression shifted slightly, not hostile exactly but wary. Like a dog that's not sure if the approaching stranger has treats or a stick. "Darren," I said pleasantly. "Congratulations again on the wedding. It was beautiful." "Thanks, Selena." He gestured to his audience with the casual confidence of someone who's never had to doubt his place in the world. "I was just telling everyone about the honeymoon. Alina's probably told you, we stayed at this incredible resort in Santorini." "She mentioned it," I replied. "Must have been expensive." A ripple of uncomfortable laughter from the group. Even in rich circles, directly mentioning money is slightly gauche. But Darren took the bait. "Well, fortunately we can afford it," he said, that same dismissive tone creeping into his voice. "I believe in treating my wife properly, even if—" He paused, glancing at me with what he probably thought was tactful restraint. "Even if what?" I asked quietly, more uncomfortable shifting from his audience. Someone cleared their throat. "Even if not everyone in the family has the same resources," Darren finished, his smile sharp enough to cut glass. There it was. Not the exact words from the wedding, but the same sentiment. The same casual dismissal. The same assumption that he could publicly diminish me without consequence. Perfect. I set my mimosa down on the marble coffee table and opened the first folder. "Actually, Darren, I think there might be some confusion about my resources." The room went quiet. Not wedding reception quiet. This was different. Sharper. The kind of silence that happens when people sense blood in the water but aren't sure yet who's bleeding. I pulled out a certified bank statement dated 3 days earlier and placed it on the coffee table where everyone could see it. $51.2 million. Spelled out in the kind of official typography that banks use when they want to make sure there's no confusion about numbers. "I've been managing my late husband's estate for 7 years, I said conversationally, like I was discussing the weather. "The inheritance has performed quite well." Darren's face went through several colors: confusion, disbelief, then something approaching nausea. "That's—" he started, then stopped. 51 million, I said helpfully. Plus change. Hit the like button if you believe revenge is best served in silence. I opened the second folder and spread out the patent documentation, the real estate holdings, the investment records showing 7 years of smart financial decisions. The water purification patents alone bring in about $400,000 annually, I continued in the same pleasant tone. And the mineral rights in Colorado have been, well, let's just say fracking has been very good to me. The federal judge leaned forward to examine the documents. Patricia's champagne glass slipped in her hand. Alina was staring at me like I'd just revealed I could fly. But I was watching Darren. Watching his honeymoon confidence crumble as he realized he'd just publicly humiliated a woman who could buy his family's country club and turn it into a parking lot. The silence stretched until it became painful. Finally, Darren found his voice. I had no idea." "Of course you didn't," I replied, closing the folders with the kind of calm that comes from 15 years of practice. "I've worked very hard to make sure people don't know. It's safer that way." I looked around the room at faces that had gone from polite dismissal to something approaching respect. Or maybe fear. Sometimes it's hard to tell the difference. "The next time you want to discuss someone's financial situation publicly," I said, my voice still pleasant but carrying an edge that could have cut diamonds, "you might want to make sure you know what you're talking about first." I picked up my folders and walked toward the door, leaving $51 million worth of documentation on their coffee table like a calling card. Behind me, the room erupted in whispers. Darren called me poor. But he'll never forget the day silence made me rich. The aftermath hit faster than I expected. By Monday morning, Darren's family lawyer was calling my house. Not to threaten, to retreat. Polite inquiries about potential misunderstandings and family harmony. The kind of legal tap dancing that happens when powerful people realize they've picked a fight with someone more powerful. I let him leave voicemails. By Tuesday, Patricia Lussett was sending flower arrangements with handwritten notes about getting off on the wrong foot and looking forward to a fresh start. Expensive flowers, the kind that require specialist florists and same-day delivery. I donated them to the nursing home where I volunteer. By Wednesday, Alina showed up at my door. My daughter looked exactly like I had 15 years ago. Overwhelmed, confused, trying to process information that changed everything she thought she knew about her life. "Mom," she said, settling onto my couch with the careful movements of someone who's afraid the ground might shift under her feet. "We need to talk." I made tea, the ritual giving both of us time to figure out where to start. "How long?" she asked finally. 7 years. Since your father died. $51 million. Give or take. She was quiet for a long time, staring into her mug like it might contain answers. "Why didn't you tell me?" This was the question I'd been dreading since I first decided to hide the inheritance. How do you explain to your daughter that you've been lying to her for 7 years? How do you make her understand that every time she worried about money, every time she took out student loans or worked double shifts or chose the cheaper option, you could have solved her problems with a single phone call? "Because money changes people," I said finally. "Not just the people who have it, the people around them. I'm your daughter. And I wanted you to stay my daughter. Not my heir, not my financial advisor, not someone who second-guesses every decision I make because you're worried about your inheritance." She considered this, her teacher's mind working through the logic. "The cottage," she said eventually. "The old car. The coupons. All real. I live on my teaching salary and your father's life insurance. The inheritance stays in investments." "But why?" This was the harder question. How do you explain survival strategies to someone who's never been hunted? After your father died, his brother tried to steal everything. Lawyers, judges, forged documents. They almost succeeded. I learned that being visibly rich makes you a target. So you disappeared. Into ordinary, yes. It kept us safe. Alina set down her tea and looked at me with something I hadn't seen in her eyes since she was a child, complete attention. "Darren hurt you," she said. "Darren revealed himself," I corrected. "There's a difference. He called you poor at our wedding. In front of everyone. He reduced 15 years of survival into one dismissive word. He made me invisible at your celebration." My daughter was quiet for another long moment, processing. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now you decide what kind of marriage you want to have. With a man who publicly humiliates your mother, or with a man who learns from his mistakes. And if he doesn't learn?" I thought about the legal documents Jonelle had prepared, the trust structures that would protect both Alina and the inheritance from any future claims. "Then you'll discover that your mother has gotten very good at protecting the people she loves." Comment below. Was this the perfect moment for Selena to reveal her truth? That evening, after Alina left, I sat in my garden watching the sun set behind my neighbor's fence. The same view I'd had for 7 years, from the same modest house that had hidden me in plain sight. But something was different now. The secret that had protected me for so long was gone, replaced by something more powerful, the truth. My phone rang. Darren's number. Selena, he said when I answered. His voice was different. Smaller somehow, stripped of the casual confidence that had carried him through our first meetings. I owe you an apology. Yes, I said simply. You do. I was wrong about you. About everything. I'm sorry. I could have made it easy for him. Could have accepted the apology and moved on, the way women are trained to smooth over men's mistakes. Instead, I said, Darren, you didn't just insult me at the wedding. You tried to erase me. You dismissed 15 years of survival and strength and sacrifice because I didn't look like your definition of success. Silence on his end. I've spent 7 years protecting my daughter from exactly the kind of person who sees her as a pathway to wealth, I continued. I hope I was wrong about you. For Alina's sake. You were wrong, he said quickly. I love her. I would never. Then prove it. Not to me, to her. Be the husband she deserves, not the man who humiliates her family for social points. When I hung up, the garden felt different. Lighter, somehow. Like I'd been holding my breath for 7 years and could finally exhale. The money was still there, still growing in accounts downtown. But it wasn't my secret anymore. It was just my money, a tool I could use instead of a burden I had to carry alone. For the first time since Maurice died, I felt truly powerful. He thought calling me poor would put me in my place. Instead, he'd just woken something that had been sleeping in shadows, protected by silence and sealed documents, waiting for exactly this moment. 6 months later, I'm sitting in the same garden, but everything has changed. The cottage is still modest, the car still reliable, the wardrobe still practical. But the silence that once protected me has transformed into something else entirely: choice. I still teach at the community center, but now I also fund scholarships for students who remind me of myself. People fighting systems designed to keep them invisible. The water purification patents Maurice developed have become the foundation for a non-profit that brings clean water to communities corporations ignore. Quiet money doing loud good, the way Maurice always intended. Alina comes by twice a week now, usually with questions about investments or foundation work or the complexities of managing wealth without letting wealth manage you. She's learning what I had to discover through trial and survival. That power without purpose is just another kind of poverty. Darren comes too, though less frequently and with a humility that wasn't there before. The man who once dismissed me as poor but sweet, now asks my advice on business decisions. It turns out that building $51 million from $37 million requires exactly the kind of financial sophistication he'd assumed I lacked. The change in him is real, I think. But I'm watching. Always watching. Because here's what I've learned about people like Darren, people like Robert, people who mistake quiet for weak and modest for stupid. They reveal who they really are when they think no one important is looking. And I'm always looking now. The Foundation Board meets next week to discuss our expansion into educational funding. The water projects are ahead of schedule and under budget. The patent renewals are generating more income than ever, money that flows directly into programs Maurice would have loved. But the most important change isn't in the bank accounts or the foundation reports. It's in the mirror. The woman looking back at me isn't hiding anymore. She's not performing poverty or pretending weakness or apologizing for taking up space. She's someone who learned that silence can be armor, but truth is a better weapon. Someone who discovered that real wealth isn't just about money. It's about the power to protect the people you love and the wisdom to know when protection means fighting back. I keep the mahogany desk in my bedroom, but I don't need the stuck drawer anymore. The documents that once had to hide are now displayed in frames on my office wall. The court ruling that saved me, the patent certificates that sustain me, the trust documents that protect my daughter's future. Evidence that sometimes the quietest person in the room is the most dangerous. Sometimes the woman everyone dismisses is the one who changes everything. I still get calls from lawyers occasionally, people who think a widow living in a modest cottage might be easy prey for some new scheme. I listen politely to their pitches, thank them for their time, and then forward their information to Jonelle, who adds their names to a very special list. The list of people who mistake silence for weakness. They usually learn better. Last week, a journalist contacted me about writing an article on hidden wealth in America. Stories of people who live below their means while managing significant assets. I declined the interview, but I've been thinking about her question. What would you tell women who are afraid to show their strength? I think I would tell them what Maurice used to tell me, what the legal battle with Robert taught me, what Darren's insult finally made me understand. The world will try to make you invisible. Don't help. The world will try to reduce your story to a single word: poor, naive, lucky, simple. Don't accept their editing. The world will mistake your silence for absence, your modesty for weakness, your care for others as proof that you don't matter. Prove them wrong. Not with noise, not with flash, not with the kind of wealth that screams for attention, but with evidence. With competence. With the quiet certainty that comes from knowing exactly who you are and exactly what you're capable of. Darren called me poor at my daughter's wedding, thinking it would put me in my place. Instead, it taught me that my place isn't defined by other people's assumptions. My place is wherever I choose to stand. And I choose to stand in the light. If Selena's story inspired you to see your own strength differently, don't leave without hitting that subscribe button and sharing this with someone who needs to hear that silence can be powerful, but truth is unstoppable. Turn on notifications so you won't miss our next story about love, courage, and the moment everything changes. Drop a comment below about a time when someone underestimated you. Your story might just inspire someone else to find their voice. Until next time, remember, the quietest person in the room might just be the most powerful.